My name is Taya Kitman, and I am the director of the Nation Institute. Thank you. Thanks. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all here today to the 10th annual Ridenhour Prizes. We would never have believed this when we started. We would now be celebrating our 10th year, and we're so honored that you were able to join us today. 10 years ago, we were in a much smaller room, and we had just founded the prizes, and Randy Fertel and Hamilton Fish put this event together. Our inaugural honorees were Ambassador Joe Wilson, who is actually here with us today. Joe? The other winners were Daniel Ellsberg and Deborah Scroggins. Although it was just the beginning, everyone who was present knew that we were part of something that was special, an occasion that was an authentic celebration of truth-telling and courage in public life. Over the years, the Ridenhour Prizes have grown in stature and in size. We now have over 400 people here today, and we're so happy that you were able to join us. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the following individuals and organizations whose support has made this afternoon possible: the Fund for Constitutional Government, the Bauman Foundation, the Schooner Foundation, AFSCME, Defending Dissent Foundation, the Community Service Society of New York, Pantareya, and EPIC. And I'd also like to thank Micheline Klagsburn and Ken Grossinger. And now it is my great pleasure to welcome to the stage the co-founder of the Ridenhour Prizes, Hamilton Fish, and our strategic partners, Louis Clark from GAP, Conrad Martin from FSG, and our wonderful MC, Danielle Bryan. Thank you.
Before we go any further, we would like to recognize a person who every year brings Ron Ridenhour into this room. And he is a man that is assured every year after the event that Ron would have had a great time here had he been with us. And so I would like to honor and recognize Randy Fertel, who without whom this would not be possible. But every committee meeting, every organizing event, every steering committee event, every decision-making, Randy brings Ron into the room.
Thank you. I'm Conrad Martin. I'm Executive Director of the Fund for Constitutional Government. And it's been an honor to be associated with these Ron Ridenhour Awards. It's rare that we get together and celebrate truth. And some of the people that end up not being recognized are all of you. I mean, one of the things whenever I'm at the reception is that I see how many of us that work together don't spend enough time together. And I think it's one of the things that really makes this event special. One of our regular attendees is not with us for the luncheon, and that's Bob Edgar. Bob passed away yesterday. It was very surprising, but I wanted to refer to one of Bob's favorite quotes. And it is, we need to stand up when others tell us to sit down, and we need to speak out when others tell us to be silent. I think that speaks to the spirit of the Ridenhour Awards, and I want to recognize some people in the audience. I'll ask that you hold your applause, and they are the recipients of the previous Ridenhour Awards that are here with us for the 10th. You have to excuse me because this phone just went dead. This is in no specific order, but when I read your name, if you'd stand and if you'd hold the applause until the end. Rick Piltz, Rajiv Chandrasekaran, Ronit Avni, Eileen Foster, Thomas Drake, a free man, Thomas Tam, Matt Ho, Danny Davis, still in uniform, or he was last night. There you are. And Matthew Diaz. We thank you all, and a big round of applause for the previous recipients. If I missed any Ridenhour Award winners, stand up. I don't think I did. I hope I didn't. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I missed two. Nick Turse and Jane Mayer. And Joe Wilson, and it's good that he's last. He's half of himself compared to when we first gave him the award, but it all started with Joe over in a much smaller room. So with that, I want to just quickly hand one of the co-founders, and we have something here.
Oh,
for Randy.
a token.
A token.
And
you don't have to share it.
And a gesture that addresses his only flaw, excessive sobriety.
I thought that was going to go the other way. You can stay up here and start. Yeah, okay. Our 10th anniversary. I'm so proud of what we built together. Show of hands, how many of you have been here for 5 of these? 8 of these? 10 of these? We have built this together. I'm not saying the Pulitzers are looking over their shoulder, but we've created a community uniquely committed to courageous truth-telling. Ron would be very proud and I'm sure astonished at we've built this in his name. And I'm proud once again to bring his spirit into the room. A number of his old friends are in the room. Mike Longman, John Pope, Wayne Carlin is not here, I don't think. His family is at my table, Joan and Tom Davis. And Cindy. Please join me in thanking them for their commitment to Ron's memory. And I'm sure they thank you for standing by Ron and his memory. I should also like to take a moment to acknowledge the absence of my associate, Diana Pinkley, who served Ron in these awards from the start. Like Ron, she is much missed. You can read about her in the program. Special thanks to Ann Cashin, who is here, of Johnny's Half Shell, who gives us, the Ridenhour family, a very special dinner the night before. Really wonderful food. My warmest thanks to our strategic partners without whom these 10 years would have been impossible. You've just met them, Daniel Bryan of Pogo, Conrad Martin of FCG, Lewis Clark of GAP, Stephen Aftergood of Federation of American Scientists. Special thanks to Taya Kittman and Ruth Baldwin and all the hardworking folks at the Nation Institute. And last but not least, Ham Fish, my co-founder, who tells the story of our founding in our program. I hope you'll take a look. Thank you. This year, my task of explaining what made Ron tick is made a bit easier by this book. There's a copy on each of your tables. We gave Nick Turse a special Ridenhour Prize for reportorial distinction in 2009 for his Nation article, A My Lai a Month, about the widespread atrocities in the war. Now Turse has continued that work in Kill Everything That Moves. In doing so, he has borne out Ron's most deeply held conviction that My Lai was no aberration, that the Vietnam War was an atrocity-making situation created by political and military policy, using once secret government investigations that lay buried in the National Archive until he happened upon them, and using interviews both with American vets and Vietnamese survivors of atrocities. Turse has laid that question to rest. As Ron used to say, a scorched earth policy was one of the tools in the military toolkit that they deployed when they thought they needed it. Now, beyond any shadow of a doubt, Nick has proved that to be the case. I know that Ron would be extremely proud to have helped to inspire Nick's work, and I think Ron's memory now rests easier that that work is done. Nick will be part of the panel discussion that follows our luncheon today in another room. To drag this before you may seem to indulge in ancient history. My Lai's 45th anniversary will be next March 16th. The fall of Saigon was 38 years ago this month. But My Lai matters, as Ron always said, because we keep finding ways to repeat it. We may change the method. We may use surrogates as at El Mozote in El Salvador, where under President Reagan, the U.S. trained Salvadoran Atlacatl battalion murdered 1,000 civilians. We may use military prisons as at Abu Ghraib. We may use shock and awe, smart bombs, or now the near-silent death of drones. But one thing that links all these sequelae of My Lai is that the chain of command maintains deniability, and that the shit, as the grunts say, always flows downhill. And the trouble always seems to come from the random acts of a few bad apples. William Calley, Lindy England. But for them, America's perfect exceptionalist moral record would remain unsullied. I can hear Ron saying, yeah, sure. Ron wasn't around for the horrors of Abu Ghraib, but he always hated the fact that no one above the rank of colonel was charged for My Lai, and that only William Calley was convicted. Our first Ridenhour Courage Prize winner, Daniel Ellsberg, who is best remembered for making the Pentagon Papers public, eloquently addressed this point at the Congressional Conference on War and National Responsibility here in Washington in 1970. The, quote, legal emphasis on low-technology war crimes, Dan argued back then, tends to absolve our use of high-technology weapons, such as B-52s, carrier aircraft, helicopter gunships, and anti-personnel cluster bombs, which are our main implements of death in the Vietnam War. Furthermore, as he continued, to define atrocities in terms of perpetrators who looked upon the faces of the enemy, their victims, another aspect of common usage, he says, is to say only those who can see the faces of their victims are in fact war criminals. Is it a coincidence, Dan wondered, that that excludes everyone above the rank of captain? To depart from that rule, he argued, leads to the highest ranks of the military, and above that to the highest civilians in government. But that, too, he concluded, is a direction in which we must go. It was exactly in this direction, up the chain of command, that Ron's thinking led. But it is also in the direction Dan describes that our push-button warfighting has gone, a way of ensuring, as the military likes to intone, no more My Lais, without in fact reducing collateral damage, as they like to call civilian deaths. The drone wars are our latest redaction of no more My Lais. Who are you going to indict? A guy somewhere outside Las Vegas following orders to push a button at Creech Air Force Base? You'd have better luck at the craps tables. It is essential for us to keep steadfastly in mind the ease with which government applies war as the solution to international conflicts. It is essential to continue to find and expose the lies and the liars that allow that ease. And it is essential to support and celebrate those who, with great difficulty and facing great danger, uncover and bring to light those lies and liars. That's what we do here. We have much to be proud of. And so let me welcome the latest members of the Ridenhour family of courageous truth-tellers: James Hansen, Jose Antonio Vargas, Seth Rosenfeld, Kirby Dick, and Amy Ziering. We are honored by your service and the service of all our winners, 10 years worth, to our nation. There are lots of ways to serve our nation, speaking truth to power being one of the most dangerous and one of the most important. Thank you very much.
It is so great to be in a room with really the best and the best of Washington. What we have in this room is the best of public interest advocacy, journalism, philanthropy, government service, and academia. You're all here, and the bad guys did not get invited. So today's awardees and the people who are introducing them, they live the values we want our country to embody. They are the glimpses of how great we can be. The first awardee for truth-telling is introduced by Gabby Pacheco. She lives in my home state of Florida, but is originally from Ecuador. Since high school, she has bravely been raising awareness of the plight of undocumented students. Gabby and Jose remind us that our country has not yet evolved to embody the ideals that are engraved on the bottom of the Statue of Liberty 110 years ago. But their example also reminds us of what we can still become as a nation. Gabby?
What an honor it is for me to be here among you all. And what an honor it is to receive this award on behalf of my good friend, Jose Antonio Vargas. We all have stories to tell, and some of the stories are harder than others. 8 years ago, I was in this same room telling my story to a room full of reporters. And back in the day, 8 years ago, that was not the cool, sexy, or hot thing to do. However, I felt that it was needed. And since I was in high school, I started sharing my story because I knew that, one, I was not the only undocumented person in this country. And two, that by sharing my story, I was going to empower other people, but also find people that were going to be willing to help me to get to the next level. Telling stories and telling the truth and shining light into the shadows and the lives that we live is not necessarily easy. And those things come at a cost. For me, the cost was in 2006 when Immigration, Customs, and Enforcement came early one morning to look for me and detained me because here I was, an undocumented person, making noise. And so as they approached the door, the person that opened the door was my sister. And both my parents and my sisters were detained by Immigration, Customs, and Enforcement. And it was a huge prize that I had to take. I never thought that, one, immigration was going to come after me, and two, that they were going to detain and take away from me the most precious things that I had in my life, my family. But it was community, and it's also me bargaining with them and saying that I was not going to talk to the media anymore, that I was not going to tell people my status, that bargaining that I had to kind of do because I continue to talk to the media. And as a matter of fact, on Monday, I testified in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee. And I openly talked about my journey as an undocumented person, my family's struggle, and the need for immigration reform. And it was in 2010 when my friend Felipe Sosa Matos and his partner Juan Rodriguez and Carlos Roa, we embarked on a 1,500-mile walk from Miami to Washington, D.C. to bring to light our stories. And it was through that journey that I had the opportunity to meet Jose Antonio Vargas. I met Jose in 2011, right before his article was about to be published in the New York Times. And he was inspired by the youth and the people coming out and saying that we were undocumented, unafraid, and unashamed. He is one of the persons that, I've been in this movement for 10 years. And there hasn't been one single person like Jose Antonio Vargas who has been able to bring this issue to where we're at today. It is because of him and hundreds of other courageous people that have told his story that we are in the eve of having an immigration reform bill passed in the Senate. And I do believe that we're going to get there and that President Obama will sign into law an immigration reform bill. I really believe in the passion that Jose has to tell a story, and what a great asset that he's a journalist. He's an award-winning journalist who has been able to really capture the hearts and minds of so many. And so his story to me, I know that has opened a lot of doors, and I'm proud that he is my friend. Also proud and thankful for this award that is being given to him, because I feel that it's not just that we're honoring him, but that we're honoring the hundreds of young people, the hundreds of thousands of people that have come out of the shadows into the light. And actually, there's some among us that were able to be here. And if you could please stand, our fearless dreamers. I know that we have one up in the balcony. And so in honoring Jose, you're honoring all of us, you're honoring our life, and you're moving the agenda forward. He couldn't be with us today, he's in San Diego, but he wanted to make sure that he sent a message to all of you and his thing. So there's supposed to be a video that's gonna come out. Thank you so much again, and it was a pleasure to be here and represent Jose.
Hi. I'm Jose Antonio Vargas. I'm a journalist, I'm a filmmaker, and I'm the founder of Define American, which seeks to elevate how we talk about immigration in a country founded and replenished by immigrants. I am incredibly grateful and honored and humbled to be receiving this award, and I'm also incredibly sorry that I can't be there with you today to accept it in person. I'm in San Diego, as you're watching this, partly actually to visit the US-Mexico border at a time in which we're talking about immigration, and immigration reform is at the forefront of people's consciousness, especially in Washington, D.C. It's important to remember that immigration is not only about the US-Mexico border and not only about border security. I am a journalist. It's been my identity for more than a decade of my life. I was born in the Philippines, and I was sent to America by my mother to live with my grandparents. My mother wanted to give me a better life, so she gave me up. I arrived in the United States in 1993 and loved it the moment I got here. Just the possibilities of America and the fact that America had, has a room for someone like me, and someone who looked like me, and someone who talked like me, and someone who wanted to learn all about America. It wasn't until I was 16 years old, 4 years later after arriving here, that I found out, after going to the DMV to get my driver's license, that I'm undocumented, that the papers that my grandfather, a naturalized American citizen, had bought for me to get me here, that the green card and the passport that he had purchased were actually fake. I was 16 and it was 1997, 4 years before the DREAM Act was even introduced. My saving grace, my salvation, was actually journalism. The following year, when I was 17, my English teacher, Mrs. Dewar, said I was asking too many annoying questions and I should do this thing called journalism. And so she sent me to a journalism camp in San Francisco. And I have to tell you, for me, I wasn't a good writer at all. My English wasn't perfect, far from it. But the moment I saw my name on a piece of paper, The moment I saw my byline in a newspaper, I thought it was a way of existing. I rationalized to myself, if I can't be in this country because I don't have the right kind of papers, what if I'm on the paper? I thought I could just write my way into America. I thought I could just write as many of these articles and be successful and earn my way into citizenship. At least that was my plan. And for 12 years, that's what I did. Working for the San Francisco Chronicle, the Philadelphia Daily News, the Washington Post, the Huffington Post, the New Yorker. I went as far as I thought I could. I made it even further than I thought I ever could. Living in Washington, D.C., actually visiting places like the National Press Club, going to Capitol Hill to cover a press briefing, going to the White House to cover a state dinner. It was incredibly scary for me to be an undocumented person without legal papers and be living and working in Washington, D.C., but I made it. And I made it actually because of a man, a journalist at the Washington Post who started at the Washington Post the year I was born, in 1981, is a man named Peter Pearl. And I actually partly dedicate this award to him. When I got to the Washington Post in 2004, I was freaked out. I thought I had the word illegal tattooed on my forehead. So I decided 4 months after arriving in Washington, D.C. that I was going to have to tell somebody. And I told Peter Pearl. I took him for a walk at Lafayette Park, sat him down and told him everything. And I expected him to say, all right, we have to report you now. Instead, he said, this is now our shared problem, keep going. And I wonder how many other Peter Pearls are across the country doing that exact same thing for undocumented people like me. How many educators, coworkers, neighbors, friends, lovers have done that to protect and to answer to a moral. There's law and there's what's right. And Peter Pearl decided to do what was right in his heart. And I'm forever grateful for him for that. And I also dedicate this award to my dear friend Gabby Pacheco and all the other undocumented young people who bravely and courageously came out to tell their stories long before I did. When I convinced the editor of Time magazine to let me post on the cover with 35 other undocumented people in this cover last summer, Gabby Pacheco was actually the first phone call. She was the first person I called and said, I gotta get you to New York and you gotta go do this with me. And the headline is, we are Americans, just not legally. And as Washington, as Capitol Hill debates this historic immigration bill, and as we debate what the future of our country is going to be like, and how we're going to change our laws, I'm here to say to you that I am an American. I just don't have the papers to show you.
Elizabeth Gauthier is going to introduce the winner of the book prize. Liza is a cherished colleague in the open government community, a perfect blend of government experience and public interest outrage that makes her a powerful advocate. She's exactly the kind of person we need more of, both on Capitol Hill and especially in the Department of Justice, but I'm very glad she's now in our community. Liza demands that our government live up to its potential by protecting our civil liberties, despite the increasing pressure on them from the ever-expanding national security state. Liza?
Thank you, Danielle. It is my honor to introduce the recipient of this year's Ridenhour Book Prize, Seth Rosenfeld, and his book, Subversives: The FBI's War on Student Radicals and Reagan's Rise to Power. We live in a time in which the legal and practical restrictions on our government's ability to spy on its own citizens are weakening by the day. A decade ago, the law required the government to obtain a court order to wiretap Americans' international communications. Today, no individualized court order is needed. A decade ago, customs agents were subject to a directive that required them to have reasonable suspicion in order to search the contents of your laptop when you returned home from overseas travel. Today, agents are free to copy and read all of the files with no basis for suspicion whatsoever. In 2001, FBI agents had to have some reason to suspect wrongdoing in order to send undercover agents or informants into places of worship. Today, the FBI can and does infiltrate mosques at will. When I tell my friends and colleagues, particularly the younger ones, about these changes, the reaction I often hear is, "So what? I'm not a terrorist or a criminal. I have nothing to hide." For years, attempting to answer this argument has been one of the most frustrating and difficult tasks I've faced as an advocate. My answer now is this book. Seth has presented unassailable evidence of the FBI's ruthless campaign to disrupt and punish lawful political activity on the Berkeley campus in the 1960s. No one who reads this book can maintain the illusion that the mere collection of information by government officials is no cause for concern. No one who reads this book can doubt that unfettered powers to collect information can be and will be abused, not because the officials we entrust with these powers are evil, but because they are human and subject to all the human weaknesses that are so vividly illustrated in this book: ambition, fear, pettiness, and blind ideology. What's particularly wonderful about this book is the way that it animates this lesson. Seth is a gifted storyteller, and the book captures the personalities and the relationships that drove this saga. It makes the people, the events, real, and making the abuses of the past real to people who either didn't live through them or didn't know about them or didn't really believe them is the best way, and perhaps the only way, to make today's threats to liberty real as well. Perhaps not surprisingly, the government was not eager to help Seth in this effort. He spent 30 years battling the government in Freedom of Information Act lawsuits in order to obtain the 300,000 documents that he used to write this book. I used to work at the Department of Justice, and I defended the government in FOIA litigation, and I can tell you, you need to measure time spent in FOIA litigation like dog years. So 30 years of FOIA litigation feels like roughly 2 centuries of misery. Seth's persistence and his dedication were extraordinary. He scored some truly stunning victories. Most striking to me, he convinced multiple federal judges that the documents compiled by the nation's leading law enforcement agency could not be described as law enforcement records because they had no rational nexus to law enforcement. That finding says it all. The fact that you may not be doing anything that's of interest to law enforcement is no guarantee that the FBI will never be interested in you. I suspect that if Seth were to file similar requests today, his battle might be even more difficult. Rather than simply stamping "do not file" on the records of black bag jobs, the FBI would classify them, which would pretty much take them out of reach in the context of FOIA. I don't know what the actual classification levels were in the 1960s, but I do know that in 1995, there were 3.6 million decisions to classify information, and by 2011, there were 92 million decisions to classify. The secrecy fortress is in many ways more impregnable now than it has ever been. In the prologue to his book, Seth writes, Above all, this book illustrates the dangers that the combination of secrecy and power pose to democracy, especially during turbulent times. That danger is alive and well today, and we owe a debt of gratitude to Seth for the powerful illustration he has given us. I'm delighted to present the Ridenhour Book Prize to Seth Rosenfeld.
Thank you very much. I am greatly honored and humbled to receive this award in the memory of Ron Ridenhour, a citizen, a whistleblower, and an investigative reporter of the highest order. I first began the research that would lead to this book, Subversives, in 1981 when I was a journalism student at UC Berkeley. My editor at the Daily Californian asked me to take a look at some FBI records that the campus newspaper had obtained under the Freedom of Information Act. I already knew that UC Berkeley had been an epicenter of student protest during the 1960s, and I knew also that Senator Frank Church's hearings in the 70s had exposed massive FBI surveillance and harassment of people engaged in lawful dissent in other places. So I jumped at the chance to see what the FBI had been up to at Berkeley. I researched the files, I wrote several articles, but I realized that there was much more to the story. So in 1981, I submitted a greatly expanded Freedom of Information Act request seeking any and all records in any way concerning the University of California and more than 100 other organizations and individuals connected with the campus. I figured I would get the files in about a year, write up the stories, and go on to the next project. I had no idea that I was embarking on what would become a 28-year legal battle in which I would bring 5 lawsuits under the Freedom of Information Act, that the FBI would spend more than $1 million trying to suppress the records I was seeking, and that ultimately 7 federal judges would order the FBI to release more than 300,000 pages, that my case would set legal precedent in favor of open government, and that the courts would also order the FBI to pay more than $1 million additionally to my pro bono lawyers for prevailing in court. These FBI records provide the most extensive account of the FBI's activities on any college campus during the Cold War period. Among other things, they show that J. Edgar Hoover's FBI initially focused in the 1940s on investigating Soviet espionage attempts to gain secrets from the nuclear laboratories overseen by the University of California. But they show that the FBI veered from that important national security mission to instead turn counterintelligence techniques developed to use against adversaries during wartime on professors and students engaged in legitimate dissent. The FBI unlawfully investigated Mario Savio, the leader of the 1964 free speech movement, a nonviolent protest against a campus rule, and listed him as a key activist, someone to be disrupted and neutralized under the counterintelligence program, or COINTELPRO. The FBI put dozens of students and professors on its so-called security index, a secret nationwide list of people to be detained without warrant in the event of a national emergency. I recently discovered also an FBI record showing that Ron Ridenhour had also been placed on the security index. FBI officials waged a concerted campaign throughout the 1960s to get UC President Clark Kerr fired because they disagreed with his policies and his politics. They leaked false reports about him to the media, to members of the Board of Regents, and even to President Johnson. But eventually, FBI officials realized that they would never get rid of Kerr as long as Pat Brown, Jerry Brown's father, was governor, because Brown was a staunch supporter of Clark Kerr. Kerr was, in fact, one of the towering figures in higher education and the developer of the master plan for higher education that has been used throughout this country and around the world. So when Ronald Reagan ran for governor in 1966, Hoover and other FBI officials viewed this as a breath of fresh air. In fact, the FBI had a secret relationship with Reagan going back to Hollywood in the 40s. The FBI records show that Reagan was a much more active informer in Hollywood than we previously knew, and that he reported other actors and actresses to the FBI, sometimes on the scantiest of evidence. In return for his help in Hollywood, J. Edgar Hoover gave Reagan personal and political assistance in the following decades. In 1960, for example, the FBI helped Reagan investigate the romantic life of his daughter, Maureen Reagan. Then in 1965, just as Reagan was about to begin his run for governor, the FBI warned him that his son, Michael Reagan, was consorting with the son of an infamous mobster, Joe Bonanno. One of the most interesting FBI documents released to me records Reagan's response when he received this secret warning. Reagan said that he was most appreciative and that he realized that such an association and actions on the part of his son might well jeopardize any political aspirations he might have. He stated that he realized it would be improper to express his appreciation in writing. So he asked the FBI agent to convey his great thanks to Hoover personally. Once Reagan was elected governor, the FBI worked with him to suppress student dissent at the University of California, providing him with intelligence reports not only about students and professors, but about members of the Board of Regents, and of course about Clark Kerr, who was fired at the first Regents meeting attended by Reagan in early 1967. My research in the FBI records bears out several observations that Ron Ridenhour made in an essay he wrote for the Los Angeles Times on the 25th anniversary of the My Lai massacre. One of them was that some people, most it seems, will under some circumstances do anything someone in authority tells them to do. Another is that government institutions, like most people, have a reflexive reaction to the exposure of internal corruption and wrongdoing. No matter how transparent the effort, their first response is to lie, conceal, and cover up. I was hopeful when President Obama first took office because one of his first acts in office was to issue a strong statement in support of the Freedom of Information Act. Apparently, that memo never reached the FBI. In my experience, at least, the Department of Justice and the FBI have continued to violate the law as badly, if not more so, than any prior administration. To be sure, today's FBI is more accountable and faces much more oversight than it did in the days of J. Edgar Hoover. But once again, the nation has granted great secrecy and great power to the FBI and other national security agencies to protect it. And as these FBI records show, this combination of secrecy and power can pose a grave threat to democracy, especially during times of national crisis. If I may paraphrase Ron Ridenhour in conclusion, we will serve ourselves and future generations best if we insist on having the transparency necessary for true government accountability. I'd like to thank my publisher, Farrar, Straus & Giroux, my agent, Alice Martell, and my partner, Heidi Benson, for their great support along the way. And my great thanks to the Fertel Foundation and the Nation Institute for this wonderful and humbling award. Thank you very much.
The Film Prize winners will be introduced by Katrina. Katrina is kind of like Cher or Madonna. She doesn't need a last name for you to know who I'm talking about. Incisive, passionate, and fierce, Katrina's unwavering, except at that moment where she just was, but her unwavering voice in print and on television comforts the afflicted and afflicts the comfortable in the greatest tradition of journalism.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. It's always wonderful to come in from New York into DC into a room like this. I remember 10 years ago, Joe Wilson, very small room. Not because of you, but because this great award was growing. And I think we thought at that time in the depths of the Bush era that it was the depths of the Bush era. Now we know this is an award that is enduring and is needed now more than ever, and it is an honor to be in a room with fearless dreamers, with iconoclasts, with extraordinarily patient people like Seth Rosenfeld, and to understand that we must respect, not convict, try, harass whistleblowers, and that this honor goes to people who never stop, who are relentless in that. I am here to introduce the documentary film, The Invisible War. You have copies on your table. Today, an American female soldier in a war zone is more likely to be raped by a fellow soldier than killed by enemy fire. 1 in 5 of all active duty female soldiers are sexually assaulted. Every year, 19,000 servicemen and women are sexually assaulted. In 2011 alone, the Department of Defense estimated there were 22,800 violent sex crimes in the military. Since 2006, more than 95,000 service members have been sexually assaulted. These numbers are so staggering as to almost numb us. But the statistics don't tell us the story. It is this extraordinary film, 2012 Oscar-nominated documentary, The Invisible War. In it, director Kirby Dick and producer Amy Ziering set out to change that, to give us the stories, the human voices, giving voice to survivors of military sexual assault. And in their searing, heartbreaking stories of these brave women survivors, these truth tellers are creating real change. The film exposes a military culture rife with misogyny and sexual harassment, an institution where rape is an epidemic, and it lays bare the stark reality sexual assault survivors face. Reporting these traumatic crimes often leads to even more trauma. They're ignored, interrogated, or ridiculed. These claims are used against them. We learn that victims must sometimes report a rape to their own rapist. We see the unmarried victim raped by married men can be charged with adultery while the rapist goes free. And over we witness the truth of what Susan Brownmiller wrote so many years ago. Rape, quote, is not a crime of lust, but of violence and power. And the result is a military system that makes it easier to rape and to get away with it. Let me just tell you, because I think often we hear extraordinary stories here, but we don't see those leading in as quick a way. You heard the great story of what FOIA time is. You got to mark it in dog years. But in this case, this film has already been a powerful force for change. On April 10th, 2012, just 2 days after watching The Invisible War, then Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta ordered that all sexual assault cases be handled by senior officers, which effectively ended the practice of commanders adjudicating these cases from within their own units. Only 1 week later, in one of the first official statements ever made by a president on the issue of sexual assault in the military, President Obama called for sexual assault to be thoroughly investigated and for offenders to be held accountable. And in November 2012, after 7 years of fighting, Senator Barbara Boxer successfully pushed through an amendment that would prevent the armed forces from granting waivers to military candidates with a sex crime on their record. Senator Boxer Senator Boxer, who we had wished could be here today, credits the film for the amendment's passage. Earlier this year, during his confirmation hearings, Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel, yes, affirmed that he had seen The Invisible War. And the film was mentioned 8 times in recent Senate hearings on sexual assault in the military. So we've seen progress. We've seen progress in shorter time span than is often the case in this city. And I don't mean to demean this city because it has people like you sitting in this room, but it is a city where courage and conscience and fast pace in terms of building courage and conscience has not been the case. So we have seen progress, but as we all know in this room, you got to build on that progress. And how do you build? We must insist that the investigation and prosecution of these crimes, sex crimes, be completely removed from the military chain of command. Instead, these decisions should be made by military prosecutors trained in sexual assault investigations who cannot be influenced by senior officers in the chain of command. It is common sense. Also, a quality in short supply these days. So the film is just the beginning, and it's time for all of us to fight on behalf of those who have fought for us, for the patriots in this film, sisters and brothers, and their hundreds of thousands of fellow service women and men who have endured sexual assault. So let us take a look at a clip from this year's Ridenhour Documentary Film Prize winner, The Invisible War.
I joined the military halfway through my senior year of high school, wanting to serve my country.
The Coast Guard said that they could get me in within a month. That shipped me off. I loved that I could keep up with the guys and work as hard as they did.
The professionalism, the camaraderie.
Getting out there and giving it my all. That's what I chose to do. Everything changed the day that I was raped.
I've never seen trauma like I've seen from veterans who have suffered military sexual trauma.
This goes everywhere with me. You always have protection with Jesus, but sometimes you need just a little bit more.
Most Americans assume there is access to a system of justice.
You'd see a guy get 5 years for drugs and 2 weeks for rape.
They let this man get away with everything but murder. They gave him Military Professional of the Year award during the rape investigation.
It was a laughing matter.
He says, "You're the 3rd girl to report rape this week. You guys like all in cahoots? You think this is a game?"
About 500,000 women have now been sexually assaulted in the U.S. military.
Civilians see it as being a military problem.
Anybody can be a victim of sexual assault.
Rapists are repetitive criminals.
Why would they stop?
They go on to literally prey on women and men, girls and boys in our neighborhoods back home.
It's very difficult to do a story on the most powerful institution in the world.
The Department of Defense has a history of covering up sexual offense problems. I don't know who you think elected you to defy the Congress of the United States. What is it you're trying to hide?
It is my honor, Director Kirby Dick and producer Amy Ziering.
Thank you.
Thank you for bestowing on us this very, very kind honor. We are moved, grateful, and perhaps most importantly, heartened, as this was a film we had been told time and again we should not pursue. This was an issue no one would watch, believe, or care about. We were told not to waste our time. No one would listen. Every day in our U.S. military, according to DoD estimates, 49 men and women are sexually assaulted. Not overseas, not in the line of combat, not by the enemy, but here on American soil by their fellow soldiers. And when these men and women step up in good faith to report these crimes, they are more often than not disbelieved, themselves blamed, disavowed, and encouraged to stay silent so that the institution and its commanders can maintain an unblemished facade. So they bury their pain, confusedly return to work beside their assailants, suffer recurring attacks often, until they, more often than not, implode, not from the trauma of the assaults themselves, but from the violence of the silence imposed upon them, by their inability to speak and share, to be heard and believed by their peers and community. In the past, when the media has reported assaults in our military, these crimes have been depicted as aberrant, anomalous, the work of rogue soldiers who operate independently and beyond the knowledge and authority of their commanders. The stories flare up, tailhook, Aberdeen, and fade, as this type of reporting often presents the false hope that the issue will be expeditiously resolved once this batch of bad apples has been duly disciplined. Our film discloses the ways in which soldier-on-soldier rape is a daily and ongoing occurrence, aided and abetted by a perfect storm confluence of circumstances, which leads to its successful proliferation and cover-up. Far from being aberrations or one-off scandals, these crimes are manifestations of an ongoing epidemic, one that is ravaging the well-being of our troops, creating generations of traumatized survivors and families, and has been going on unchecked right here for decades. After a good year plus of being unable to receive funding to make this film, Kirby and I just decided to travel around the country and talk to survivors without a crew. Their stories were harrowing and heartbreaking, each one uncannily echoing the other, even though these men and women had all served in different branches, different decades, and different parts of our country. I remember leaving the house of one woman in upstate New York, Teresa, now 40 and a single mom. She had entered the Army when she was 19. After telling me her story, as I was leaving, she said, "Amy, even if you don't make this documentary, or even if you do end up making this documentary, and I'm not in it, thank you so much for coming today to talk with me. You're the first person who ever believed me, who ever cared to listen. Thank you all today for listening. It's so important, and for championing the importance of listening. And thank you so much for this award. It means so much to me and my fellow filmmakers Kirby Dick and Tanner Barklow, but most importantly to countless service members, much more courageous than we could ever be, who dared to speak the truth to our cameras, despite the considerable risks they were taking in doing so. They did this not for personal glory or self-aggrandizement, but simply because each and every one of them told me, they never wanted another soldier to have to go through what they had. We accept this award most truly and kindly on their behalf and dedicate it to them. And thank you all for having the kindness and compassion in bestowing it, as it lets them know that you are there, you are listening, and they are no longer invisible.
Amy always brings down the house. First of all, I would just like to just say how honored I am just to be in this room with everyone here. There's so many people here that helped shape my political education, really, over the last many decades. So I'm sure that I could, this is, a lot of the films that I've made have been really informed by a lot of the work that you've done, so thank you. We're very honored and humbled to receive the Ridenhour Film Prize. When Amy and I were making this film, we were hoping that it would shed light on an epidemic that has been going on for decades and that the military has been especially effective at keeping covered up. But we were not very optimistic that the film would change much because the military and our government had always responded in the past to reports about rape in the military by denying them, blaming the victims, and claiming that the problem was solved. We never expected the impact that this film would have. Not only did Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta announce some significant policy changes, but the military has begun to use the film as part of its sexual assault training. And over the last year, more than 250,000 servicemen and women have seen the film. All the Joint Chiefs of Staff have seen the film. In one case, General Welsh, the Air Force Chief of Staff, flew in all 164 wing commanders from around the world to the Pentagon to see the film and discuss the issue. As far as we know, this is the first time in history that all wing commanders have been called back to the Pentagon. So what has happened is that the military has begun to take the issue seriously. In fact, Secretary Hagel said at one point that this is the second most important issue the military has to face after Afghanistan. But the problem still continues. Tens of thousands of men and women are still being sexually assaulted each year. These assaults continue because the military's criminal justice system is rife with conflict of interest and potential cronyism. Right now, senior officers in the chain of command of both the victim and the accused adjudicate these crimes, not trained prosecutors without direct ties to the perpetrators. The one institution that can change this is Congress, which has oversight of the military. And that is why we're most pleased that the Senate, which has been completely absent on this issue for decades, is finally starting to move on the issue. Senator Gillibrand of New York and other senators, Senator Blumenthal, Senator McCaskill, are drafting legislation right now to change the military's legal justice system so survivors of military rape can receive impartial justice. It's not going to be an easy fight. The military is pushing back hard on this, insisting it can solve the problem if we just leave it alone. It can't and it won't. So we are very grateful for this award because it comes at such a crucial time. In fact, the markups to these bills are happening in June in the subcommittee and in the House Armed Services Committee. So this is a perfect time. We are very grateful because it will help to bring much needed attention to this issue so that Congress and the military will finally make the changes they need to make to protect our men and women in uniform. Thank you very much.
And if I can just say one more thing, I didn't mean to get so emotional, and I wanted to go off book and introduce someone who's here who's super important. Ben Clay, would you please stand up? And because no, stay standing. I'm going to talk about you for just 1 second. Because I was so, I wanted to add you in gracefully, and I had to stay on book. This is, when I said the service members who had much more courage than either Kirby and I, if I can just take a second and tell your story really short. We finished the film, we submitted to Sundance. Kirby brilliantly said, you know what, we better get a survivor when it's happening absolutely here right now. Like, what if our cases are set as, oh, all your subjects are too old? We found Ariana Clay, who is right now going through a court-martial and she served at Marine Barracks, Washington. I spoke to her. She said she'd absolutely do an interview. I said, why are you in the military? She said, oh, my husband, he was undergrad at Yale, graduate school at Harvard, decided he really wanted to dedicate his life to serving our country, and joined the military. He's an officer, 2 tours of duty in Iraq. And I said, wow, could I talk to your husband? And she said, well, of course you could, but he could never talk to you guys on camera. He'd never get permission. So I said, that's okay. Spoke with Ben. We had an amazing phone call. He's completely brilliant. And I said, Ben, would there be any chance, could you maybe get a release? If we'd love to speak with you as well. And he said, Amy, A, I don't really, trust the media, and I don't know you. You sound nice, but I don't know what you're going to do with our story. B, if anyone, I would never get permission. So even if I spoke to you, it's a non-starter. And he said, see, we've kind of suffered enough. So thank you, but. And so I said, okay, fair enough, Ben. How about this? We're done with the film. Why don't I come out? I'll interview Ariana. We'll interview you. Don't sign a release. We'll go home, LA, cut it, send it right back to you. You'll look at it. You'll see who we are. You'll see exactly what we're going to use. And then you'll decide. And maybe you'll think there's someone you could ask higher up who would give you permission. He said, okay, no harm, no foul. That's fine. Come on over. We interviewed Ariana, we interviewed Ben, raced back to LA, cut it December 26th, sent it to them. January 2nd, my cell phone rings, it's Ben. He says, Amy, when is Sundance? I said, it's in 20 days. We premiere on January 22nd. He said, I thought about it, and I'm going to resign. He said, they'd never give me permission, but I always wanted to serve my country, and maybe this is the best way I can do it.
Let's take a second on that, eh? We've honored those who have been tackling some of the greatest challenges to our democracy. Now we honor a person who is tackling and has been tackling the biggest challenge to our planet. Joe Rome will be introducing our Courage Prize winner. Joe is one of the few people who has successfully broken through the information overload and getting serious attention to his blog. The New York Times has reported that he's one of the country's most influential writers on climate change, and he will help us put the Courage Prize award winner into context. Joe.
Thank you. Dr. James Hansen is being honored today in part because he told Congress, the global warming now is large enough that we can ascribe with a high degree of confidence a cause and effect relationship to the greenhouse effect. The courageous part isn't what he said, it's when he said it. 25 years ago, during the sweltering summer of 1988, it was the first high-profile public statement by US government scientists alerting the country to this grave threat. Jim embodies the Ridenhour Courage Prize. When he was still at NASA and their top climate scientists, he blew the whistle on government efforts to silence him and others on climate change. Jim is a modern-day Paul Revere. If Paul Revere's Midnight Ride had taken place in 1750, and the message was, the British are coming in 25 years. Yes, climate change is a challenging story to tell, and Jim has been telling it actually since 1981, when he published his first warning that led to a major New York Times story headlined, "Study Finds Warming Trend That Could Raise Sea Levels." And yet carbon pollution has kept rising. We live in a spineless world where being scientifically right for over 30 years gives you no more credit with the national media than being a professional disinformer funded by the fossil fuel industry. How spineless is this world? If a doctor used the best science to diagnose a smoker as having early-stage emphysema, and the doctor did not urge the patient to start quitting cigarettes, he'd be charged with malpractice. But if a climatologist uses the best science to diagnose an entire planet as having early-stage climate change, and he urges the world to start quitting fossil fuels, well, then he is labeled an alarmist by industry-backed groups. And the truth is, we should all be alarmed. This is the great moral crisis of our time. By destroying a livable climate, we are stealing the future from our children and grandchildren and countless future generations. To save this spineless world from itself, supplying the truth isn't enough. You need to supply the spine, too. You need to be courageous. And so Jim has been forced by the times and by his own moral convictions to become an activist. There is a saying that applies to Jim: one man with courage is a majority. How many scientists have spawned an entire movement? 5 years ago, Jim explained that if humanity wishes to preserve a planet similar to that on which civilization developed and to which life on Earth is adopted, we need to return carbon dioxide levels back to 350 parts per million. That led Bill McKibben to found the group 350.org. Then Jim said, burning the tar sands, the Canadian tar sands, would be, quote, game over for the climate. And that led to the fight against the Keystone XL pipeline and the biggest protests and civil disobedience the climate movement has ever seen. And because Jim has the courage of his convictions, he has had the courage to be convicted himself. He's been arrested 5 times during peaceful protests. 50 years ago this month, another great moral crusader was arrested for protesting. And he wrote a letter from his jail cell in Birmingham explaining why. "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere," wrote Martin Luther King Jr. on April 16, 1963. "We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Now more than ever, we are tied in a single garment of destiny, cloaked as a species in a protective climate that we are in the process of unraveling. And so the need for activism, the need for courage, the need to speak out is as great as ever. As King put it, we will have to repent in this generation, not merely for the vitriolic words and actions of the bad people, but for the appalling silence of the good people. It is my singular honor to give you a man who will not have to repent, a man for all seasons, literally, the winner of the 2013 Ridenhour Courage Prize, Dr. James Hansen."
Thanks, Joe, for your kind words, and especially for the huge amount of work, important and effective work, that you have done in informing the public about climate change. And thanks to the Ridenhour organization for its persistence in offering me this prestigious award. I would like to use my several minutes here to summarize the truth about our current predicament with human-made climate change and the opportunity that this presents for dealing with fundamental problems faced by people in the United States and the rest of the world. The carbon dioxide, CO2, that we put in the air by burning fossil fuels will stay in the climate system for millennia. We have only felt part of the climate response due to the CO2 already in the air. The climate responds only slowly because of the great inertia of the massive global ocean and ice sheets. The irrefutable scientific conclusion is that we cannot burn all of the fossil fuels without handing our children and grandchildren and future generations a situation that is out of their control, with enormous consequences for the well-being, for their well-being, and for the very existence of many of the other species on our planet. We must leave most of the remaining coal in the ground, as well as the carbon-intensive, highly polluting, unconventional fossil fuels such as tar sands and tar shale. The task of leaving these dirty fuels in the ground and moving on to a bright future for today's young people cannot be accomplished by trickery and gimmicks, such as carbon cap and trade and offsets, with its inevitable horse trading and lobbying. We must have a simple, honest, across-the-board carbon fee collected from the fossil fuel companies at the small number of domestic mines and ports of entry. And that money must be distributed to the public 100%, equal amounts to all legal residents. The fee must continue to rise gradually so the public Businesses and entrepreneurs have the incentive to make choices and develop products that reduce and eliminate fossil fuel use. This will stimulate the economy as we develop new, more carbon-efficient products and energy sources. About 60% of the people will get more money in their monthly dividends than they pay in increased prices. But to stay on the positive side, they must make wise choices. Yes, this implies some wealth redistribution. Low-income people, if they try, can gain somewhat. Rich people who have multiple houses and fly around the world will pay more than their dividend, but they can afford it. This approach can be made international via an agreement between the United States and China. China has many reasons to join, as climate disruption will hit them hard, and they need to solve pollution problems. Other nations will then join in order to avoid border duties on their products and in order to gain the clean energy benefits. The United States must exercise leadership. This is the last chance for the liberal left and the conservative right to cooperate for the good of the nation and the world, for the good of young people, future generations, and nature. What I have described is a progressive, conservative approach. It puts an honest price on fossil fuels, making them pay for their cost to society. It allows all alternatives to compete on a level playing field. We must demand that the liberal left keep their hands out of our pockets and off of our wallets. Not one dime of the carbon fee should be used to make the government bigger. 100% of the money must go to the public. Nor should any of the money be used for subsidizing research on specific government-selected industries. The government is incompetent to choose the best technologies. Let them all compete. There are existing resources and departments for research, development, and demonstration. The public is fed up with self-indulgent partisanship. If today's parties cannot cooperate on such a simple, honest approach that would stimulate our economy, provide millions of good jobs, a clean environment, and stable climate, then in 2016, there should be a new party. Not a fringe party on the left or right, but a centrist party, an American party, a party that will take Washington back from the lobbyists and give it to the American people. Thank you.
Him to come back up so you could get a little bit more of the applause. Because you're really a giant. This is a... Thanks, Cam. This event appears seamless, really, only because of the behind-the-scenes work of Ruth Baldwin. Oh, there she is back in there. Jayati Vora and Annalise Whitley at the Nation Institute, as well as Ann Cashin for her fabulous hospitality, Abby Evans at Pogo's offices as well. There's Ann way back there. Thank you. I also want to point out the swag at your tables. You should fight over that. It's the work of our award winners as well as our host, the memoir. His book, Randy Fertel's book, The Gorilla Man and Empress of Steak, is at your tables as well. Because this is the 10th anniversary, we wanted to give you a chance to bask in this atmosphere for a little bit longer. And we're going to shift to a panel discussion in the room, I think it's the room where we were drinking earlier, right? Just right next door. It's called Ridenhour at 10, War and Whistleblowing from Vietnam to Today, which will have some of our past award winners and moderated by the fabulous Roberta Baskin. The monumental issues that we're facing deserve a more intimate and in-depth conversation than we've been able to have so far. So we'll see you over in the Holman Lounge in just a few minutes. Thank you very much for coming.